So in the honor of the Siyum Masechet, and also in the honor of the Yortzeit. I figured out there's not only just one Yortzeit tonight. There's many Yortzeits. It's Maran Rabbi Yosef. There's your uncle Rabbi Yitzhak Aminov. There's also the Tzemach Tzedek, who, by the way, who was the third Rabbi Milubavitch, the grandson of the Balatanya. There's also Rabbi Yitzhak Karo, who's the uncle of Chacham Yosef Karo. There's also Rav Moshe Al-Sheikh HaKadosh on the Torah. A lot of Yortzeits tonight. So
we got three more. No, go ahead.
I, my grandfather.
Okay.
Karo.
Okay. It counts. And also?
My mother's this week.
Okay. So, Zuchutam Ta'gen Aleinu. Nishmatat Tzura V'Tzura Hayim. Amen. Like I said, just one quick idea. There's a famous Rashi over here. Rashi finds himself in the beginning of Parashat Mishpatim. I'll read you the words inside. Rashi says, he's commenting on the pasuk, Ve'elu mishpatim la'asher tasim lifneihem. Rashi says, what is the word lifneihem? You have to put the mishpatim. What are mishpatim, gentlemen? Mishpatim are the laws. You have to put the laws in front of them. Says Rashi on the spot, he says, Amalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. So God tells Moses, he says, Lo ta'ale adatecha lomar. You shouldn't be thinking to yourself, Eshne lehem haperek v'halacha bet o gimel pa'amim. I'll teach them the law 2 or 3 times, until they're fluent in it, they know it very well. God tells Moshe, don't think that you don't have to worry to tell them the deeper reason behind the halachot. God commands Moses to put the halacha in front of them, lifnehem, mamash lifnehem. But she says, what does it mean, lifnehem? Keshulchan ha'aruch God commands Moses to put the halacha in front of the people, like a set table, ready to eat. That means anytime that the Jews, we study law, it can't be arbitrary. It can't be something that's very random and without logic. Halacha has to be studied k'shulchan aruch, as if just like you have a table set in front of you, like we have on Shabbat, like you have during dinner, like we have during the Seder, that everything is there in front of us. Halacha has to be like that also. So also, the rabbis tell us, it's a famous Kli Yakar. Kli Yakar writes that there's always a connection between the end of the parasha and the beginning of the parasha. So the Kli Yakar wants to know, what is the connection between the very end of Parashat Yitro? It says, Lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbehi. What does that mean? Lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbehi. Don't make steps by the Mizbeach. Mizbeach couldn't have any steps. It had to have a ramp going up instead. What's the big deal about steps? So one answer is like Chaim said, like he called out. He said tzniut purposes, because we don't want the steps to see the non-modesty of the Kohen. But that is the regular Peshat. But he wants to know, what is the connection between Lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot ha-mizbehi, don't have any steps going up, and Ele Mishpatim. What is the connection between steps and Ele Mishpatim? Says the Kli Yakar. Because in order to put Mishpatim, in order to be the guy that sets the law in front of people, steps, says the Kli Yakar, represents arrogance. Because sometimes when you have people going up the stairs, what do they do? Instead of going 1 at a time or 2 at a time, they do 3 or 4 at a time. So steps, they represent arrogance. It has the connotation of arrogance. Therefore, if you want to be a person that puts in front of the people halacha or mishpatim, you can't be a guy that's arrogant, because arrogance and teaching don't coincide. Therefore, based on that, I'll tell you a quick story in history. Historically wise, halacha was very difficult to access. If a person wanted to know halacha, what did he have to do? What did he have to do, gentlemen? He had to go to the Gemara. He had to go to open up the Gemara. He had to read a couple of pages before he came out with anything solid. Shulchan Aruch was the first book that came along and put everything on the table, very set, very tantalizing to eat, very kosher to eat, exactly. Very codified to eat, codified to study. And truth is, technically speaking, one time I was in the house of Chacham Yaakov Hillel. He's a big Kabbalist in Israel. And he had one of the first printings of the Shulchan Aruch, one of the very first ones. And Maran wrote, by the way, why is he called Maran? Why is Maran called Maran? Maran it's Roshei Tevot from Matayim Rabbanim Nismehu. Matayim Rabbanim Nismehu means that 200 rabbis, they gave him permission to lead. He's called, in the vernacular, the rabbi's rabbi. A lot of people that are called the rabbi's rabbi, but Maran was actually the rabbi's rabbi, because you can't be a rabbi unless you know Shulchan Aruch. So Maran is literally the coined phrase of the rabbi's rabbi. So therefore, he originally designed the Shulchan Aruch for a person to learn it once every 30 days. That's what it says in the original copy of the Shulchan Aruch. You're supposed to learn halacha maran. All four halakim. Or Hayim, Even Ezer, Choshen Mishpat, Yorah De'ah. You're supposed to learn a few pages a day without the commentary, without the Shach, without the Taz, without the Pitchei Tshuva, without the Chokek Mechokek, none of those. Just Shulchan Aruch, he designed that you should learn it once every 30 days. So his whole goal in life was to teach the people how to learn halacha and how to be aware of their Judaism. But says Maran Hachidah in the Sefer Kol Shem HaGedolim, he writes over there that the truth is there were three people that were busy working on a Shulchan Aruch. Three rabbis. It wasn't just Maran Yosef Karo. It was a few rabbis. In the introduction in Halichot Olam, this is Chacham Ovadia Sefer commentary in the Ben Ish Chai in Chelek Aleph. In the very beginning, before he talks about the halacha, he brings a small paragraph. And he writes as follows. Kabbalah b'yadenu. This comes from the Haidah. We have a tradition. Shebedorosha Maran Yosef Karo, in the generation of Maran, hayu shlosha rabbanim gedolim haroim legeshe lemelchet hakodesh. There were three rabbis who were befitting to write what's called the Shulchan Aruch. Lekabetz ka'amir gorono al kol halachot v'galot she'ashehem u'merikahem b'talmud b'rishonim lo'oskei shematita alibad hilchata. Three rabbis were fluent enough in order to bring down the law. Those three rabbis were Hagon, Rabbi Yosef, Taichik. One of the rabbis, he was a famous rabbi in Greece, in Salonika, Rabbi Yosef Taichik. He was a great rabbi. The third rabbi, he writes, V'sha'ir alav tamudo be'al ha'reish chokhmah. Famous rabbi called the Rishi Chokhmah. He bears witness to his rabbi, Rabbi Taichik, she'arba'im shana lo yashan alamita. And my rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Taichik, for 40 years, he never slept on a bed. He would sleep on a bench with his legs hanging off the end. That's how Rabbi Yosef Taichik would learn Torah. He would get up every night b'chatzot and he would learn Torah. That was the first rabbi. The second rabbi, Hagon Rabbi Yosef Bar Lev. It's no coincidence, by the way, that all three rabbis, their name were Yosef, like you went to say it tonight, right? He's collecting Yosef. All three rabbis, they're Yosef. Rabbi Yosef Taichik, Rabbi Yosef Bar Lev, and Rabbi Yosef Karo. They're all named Yosef. And he writes, he was called the Mahrival. Omaran Rabbeinu Yosef Karo, Hashem HaShlosha Hachi Nechbad. He was the most important out of all three. Even though all three of them, they were befitting enough to write the book. Min HaShamayim Hiskimu Dat Al Yedei Maran HaKadosh Rabbeinu Yosef Karo. But Min HaShamayim, they chose who? They chose Maran Beit Yosef. Why did they choose Maran Beit Yosef, says the rabbi? V'zot mipnei anava. Because he was the most humble. Because he was the most humble out of all three of them, that doesn't say that the other two weren't humble. That he was the most humble out of all of them. You could tell the way he writes is in a very soft type of manner. Maran Beit Yosef, the reason why he was chosen for this unbelievable, Rabotai, there's not one day that doesn't go by that we don't mention halacha and Shulchan Aruch. Like I said, what is the chut that he must have that every single day his name is mentioned in yeshivot hagadoshot, in shuls all over the world? Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo. Everybody mentions him. He had a tremendous zechut, and that's because he was the most humble. And says the rabbi, V'zeu b'hetem lemar Hazal. That's why it says in Hazal, Ma'machloket shebet Shammai u'beit Hillel. When anytime there's a debate between the houses of Shammai and the houses of Hillel, Shalu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. The truth is that both of them are correct. However, so why is it that we always follow Beit Hillel? The Gemara answers is because Beit Hillel were much more humble, they had much more humility than the houses of Beit Shammai. And therefore, what the Gemara says about Beit Hillel, the same thing goes with Rabbi Yosef Karo. And then he goes ahead and he asks us a question. He goes, well, that doesn't make sense. Just because a person is humble, that means that he's supposed to get the halacha. He writes it over here. You can ask a question. She'im ein hadin kedivrehem. If halacha is not like them, so you want to tell me a situation? Well, let's say the guy is wrong halacha, but yet he's very humble. Therefore, halacha is going to be kovea like him. What does it mean exactly? Because he was very humble, is halacha like him? And he writes, why was Beit Hillel always targeted to say the right thing? ועל זה השיבו מפני שהיותם אנשי אמת נוחים ועלובים וענותיהם זכו אותם מן השמיים לכוון תמיד לאמת. It's because they were humble, because God knew that they were very low with themselves, that they were zochet to, God always arranged it, that if you have a humble guy, you know that he's going to be zochet to the emet. That's the way it goes. Humility and targeting the truth, humility and being right, always coincide. If you have a guy that's very humble, Min HaShamayim, Hashem is going to make sure that he's always going to say the right thing. That's why out of all three of these rabbis, Rabbi Yosef Taichik, Rabbi Yosef Bar Lev, and Hacham Rabbi Yosef Karo, he was zocheh out of all of them to write the Shulchan Aruch because of his character, because of his tremendous humility. When it comes to humility, Rabbi Bentiu Mutzafi in a sefer called Doresh Sion, he has an unbelievable piece. He has an essay on humility. And he writes, I have it over here actually, he writes that there's a pasuk in Daniel. The pasuk says, Yehav chochmeta lechakimin. Explain, gentlemen. Yehav chochmeta lechakimin. What does that mean? Hashem will give chokhmah, Hashem will give wisdom to who? To chakimin, to people who are smart. Pause for a second. Does that make any sense? God gives wisdom to those who are smart. Says Rabbi Zion Mutafi in Doresh Sion, how did they become smart in the first place? God gives wisdom to people who are smart. So how did they become smart before? That God has to give, if God is already calling them Hachamim, so how did they get wisdom in the first place? He answered by Rabbi called Enoda Beyehuda, and he says, L'chakimin hu le'echad shemargish al atzmo shelemarot shehu yodeya. It's a guy that's talking about, we're talking about a guy that even though hu margish shehu yodeya, he knows that he knows. He knows that he knows it. He knows that he knows it. However, adayin ein hu yodeya, but he still feels that he doesn't know it. That's what he writes. Even though the guy knows that he knows, this guy's educated, but he always feels like he has more to learn. He always wants to learn more. Because he still feels like there's wisdom that's missing. Maybe we could explain the Hadan Alach when it comes to the Mesiu Masechet. We always say at the end of Mesiu Masechet, Hadan Alach, Hadrach Alan. We're always going to say that we're going to return to you. Why are we returning to him? If I learned it already, why should I return to it? What's the answer? Because no matter how much I've learned it, I'm still saying I'm going to return to you because I'm admitting that even though I just learned it, I don't know it. And therefore, Hadan Alach, I'm going to return to you because I know that even though I just finished, there's still more for me to learn. But Rosh Yeshiva Mikdash Melech Rabbi Maimon, he always used to say, if a person wants to learn something new, do Hazara. What does that mean? You want to learn something new, go over it again. Because the more you go over it, you're going to realize that you don't really know it. Says the Rabbi, Pamahat, Amar Mishu Shayach Chacham Be'einav. There was a guy that was very smart. He said that there's no other smart guy like me. He told this over to a rabbi called Rabbi Shimon ben Ibn Gabriel, one of the great rabbis. Meyamai lo ta'iti. This rabbi says, in my life, I never made a mistake. Na'ana Rabbi Shlomo ve'amar lo. So the rabbi told him, Gam im emet devarecha. Even if your words are true, even if you never made a mistake, sheyamecha lo ta'ita, harei achshav she'amarta zot ta'ita. The fact that you said that means you made a mistake. And based on that, says the rabbi, Moshe Rabbeinu, Lemarot shekatav kol Torah kula. Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest prophet. He wrote the entire Torah. Lemarot shekatuv me'id alav pe'el pe'adaber bo mar'elo be'idot umrot Hashem yabit. God was speaking to him mouth to mouth. He was a ben bayit. He was everything to God. Mosif me'id alav lo kam navi od be'yisrael ke Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest guy ever. If anybody has something to be proud of, it's Moshe. But yet, says Rabbi Zion Mutzafi, Makom Makom, Legodel Ha'anava, Katav Aleph Zeira. As we know that we read 2 weeks ago in Parashan Aleph Vayikra, the Aleph is very small. He wrote the Aleph very small in order to tell us, Mishum Shihirigish Al Atzmo. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu had what to be proud of, and he could say to himself, I'm the biggest guy in the world. Still, Adayin Ohez Hu Be'aleph. But I'm still holding as if I'm a small guy. I'm a small, very small Aleph. Adayin Eino Yodeya. I still do not know. If Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that on himself, and again, he is the only guy that could say that he is a guy that knows, but yet he still said, I'm just an Aleph. I'm still such a small guy. No matter what it means to any of us here, anybody that's listening, how much do we have to feel on atzmenu, on ourselves, that we are very small? You know, there's a famous midrash, the Torah says a couple of weeks ago in Parashah, that Moshe Rabbeinu, he came down for the luchot, and his face was glowing. You know that midrash? The face was glowing. It says in the Torah, kana or. He had a light shining from his face. Rabotai, where did the light come from? from the sun, from the Torah. Someone said from the ink. Who said from the ink? Yeah, exactly. Midrash says that because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Aleph small, so he had a little bit of ink left over in the quill. You see, God gave Moshe exactly the amount of ink he needed to write the Sefer Torah. But since Moshe wrote the ink of the Aleph very small, he had a little bit left. So what did he do, says Midrash? He took a little bit of the ink, he went like this, and all of a sudden, boom, his face begins shining. So says a rabbi called Rav Shach, Rosh Yeshiva Panovich. He says, hold on a second, I don't understand something. You know, there's another Midrash that says that even from the Tagim, you know what the Tagim are? Even from like the little crowns, the chupchiks on top of the Torah, we can learn what's called Talei Telaim Shel Halacha. We can learn thousands of halacha just from the Tagim. Says Rav Shach, well, if that's the case, what gives Moshe Rabbeinu the right to write an aleph small? That means because he wanted to show us his anava, that means we're going to lose talei teleim shehalacha. Because you wanted to write it small, you're missing out on so many laws that could have been learned out from the big aleph. You write it small, says Rav Shach, he noted it. Exactly. He's trying to tell me that when it comes to anava, even if you lose millions of halacha, it's still worth it to show or to give an example of what humility costs. Even though the humility is going to cost you a lot of money, even if it's going to cost you a lot of friends, even if it's going to cost you halakha, still writes the rabbi, that was an important lesson for Moshe Rabbeinu to teach Am Yisrael. I'm going to end off with one more point. Rabbi El Karif in the Sasbir Matecha, he tells a story about I have it right here, Rabotai. You know the famous rabbi that had a baby boy at age 88? He calls himself Rabbi Tzvi Kushilveski. Okay, Kushilveski. I have a hard time pronouncing these names, Rabotai. I can pronounce Bibi Chayev, I can pronounce Kamravapur, I can pronounce a lot of these names, but Kushilveski is very too hard for me. So he says that one time there's a famous story. Okay, listen, you don't have to believe me. Go on YouTube. The guy was interviewed by every single news station, including Meaningful Minute and what was the other one? Living L'Chaim. They all interviewed him. He's a Rosh Yeshiva of Heichal Torah in Israel, but he speaks English. His name is Rabbi Tzvi Kushilveski. And he had a baby, for his first baby boy, at age 88 years old. It's an incredible story. Go look it up on YouTube if you're bored. And he says that his first wife died when he was 80. He didn't have any kids. So he's talking to his brother-in-law, and he says, you know what, maybe it's kedai for me to get married. I want to get married. I didn't have any kids. I have to read the story inside. Rav Tzvi pana legiso. He turns to his brother-in-law, Rabbi Avraham Gorowitz. V'shatach libo b'fanav. He poured his heart in front of him. When my wife was alive, I had a hard time talking about this. No kids. I don't want to bother her. I don't want to make her feel bad. But now that she died, now I can talk a little bit about it. We didn't have any kids. Should I look for a wife? Should I get married to somebody? His brother looks at him and says, the guy is crazy. You're 80 years old, he tells him. Get out from this crazy idea. What woman is going to get married to a guy that's 80 years old? Well, he didn't give up hope. He didn't, like you said, Rabbi, he didn't let the maror get to him. He was all about the apples and the haroset. He went ahead and he found a woman that she was 57 years old. And he got married to her. And he said the words as follows. He said, if God doesn't want to give me a child, I have no problem with that. God doesn't owe me anything. And everything that God does is for the good. The only problem I do have, what's going to be after my 120? If I stand in front of the pearly gates at the end of 120, can I really answer the angels that I do all that I can to have those kids? You're right, at the age of 80 it wouldn't make any sense, but can I really stand in front of Beit Din and say that I did everything in my power in order to have children? Finally, he had a baby boy. Says the rabbi, Rav Tzvi, the guy is a very modest guy. He doesn't like to talk. He doesn't like to be in front of people. Everything he does is on the down low. והנה כאן, כשנולד בנו הראשון, הוא הסכים להתראיין בכל כלי התקשורת בארץ ובעולם. Every single news reporter wanted to interview him, and he allowed it. He said, please come into my home and interview me. שאלו אותו, מה ראה לשנות את טבעו? So they asked him, why did you change your regular life? You're such a modest guy. You're so humble. Why did you all of a sudden want to go on TV and talk about it? והשיב, and he said, הקדוש ברוך הוא עשה איתי נס שאין כמוהו. God, ברוך הבא Rabbi Glatzi. He says, God made a tremendous miracle for me. My responsibility is right now to make a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. That God in His, by His willing it, He could change all the nature of the creation of the world. Even though my character is one of anav, I'm usually humble, I usually don't like to talk. Lo yitachen shelo lekadesh shem shamayim begin anava sheli. I'm not going to put God's kiddush shem shamayim on the back of my anava. Even though I could say to myself, I'm a modest guy, I'm a tzanua guy, I'm a quiet guy, but now when it comes to God's Kiddush Hashem, and therefore, if God made me this miracle, therefore it's my job to make sure that I blast God's name out and say the tremendous Kiddush Hashem that it really is. And therefore he writes, that's the lesson. The lesson is that even though sometimes, Rabotai, we have, or we think of what we can be haughty on, what we can be arrogant on. Says the Rabbi, haughtiness and being right, it doesn't come in the same sentence. Just like when it comes to Manan Yosef Karo, that the reason why he's always right, the reason why halakha was koveh kimoto is because of the anava. Therefore he writes that is the lesson. That even though we might sometimes say to ourselves, oh, really I'm humble. The fact that you say to yourself, I'm humble, that means you're really not. And therefore, like I said, that is a lesson of a Siyum Masechet as well. When a guy, we go ahead, we say Hadran Allah, and we're going to go back to it because we're really testifying on ourselves that we don't know. And therefore, it's our responsibility, our opportunity to grow. The more we learn about it, the more we come along and we could say it. That is the true meaning of being humble. Therefore, again, I bless Kal Kadosh, and I bless our dear President, Mr. Rani Benjamini. You should go ahead and you should go Mechaya El Hayy B'ezrat Hashem Yun Yahabuta. Keep learning in the mornings. Keep giving us all of us Hezuk. B'ezrat Hashem with the Biyad Golet Tzedek. B'mihra b'amenu. Amen. B'amen.